You know, today was a weird day. It started off pretty normal, but then I bumped into some dude with sunglasses and a trench coat, and he asked me on how the weather was in Paris. And then he hands me this. Maybe I should dunk it in water first. Is anyone else here ticking? Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with part 1 of this 3-part video series on the 1/16 scale radio-controlled Israeli Tiran 5 tank. This model here was built for commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. This model underwent quite an extensive redetailing and conversion process, bringing it up to the condition that we have here, which would include not just external details, but also quite a few mechanical systems. Because of all this information, trying to squeeze all that info into one video is just going to be problematic. So just like with many of the other 1/16s that are found on this channel, this build here is going to be broken up into a 3-part video series. For part 1 of this video series, I'm going to focus exclusively on the build and construction aspect of this project, where you're going to see what the model looked like at the beginning of the project with its overall condition in both detailing as well as with its mechanical state. I'm going to take you along during the construction where you get to see how the mechanical systems were upgraded and also some of the conversion work was undertaken to bring it up to the condition that we have here. Part 2 of this video series is going to highlight exclusively the tank's external detail fittings, which obviously you can see there's quite a few of. And we're going to be going into all the small little fine minutiae and other little small detail tidbits that brought the model up to this point here. For part 3 of the video series, well, that's when we take this thing out for a test drive because it is radio controlled after all, and I think we all want to see what this thing looks like turning up some dirt. So obviously, stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming at you. And from here, well, let's go ahead and take a step back to when this model was first started to really get a good idea on what the condition of this model was in. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'm going to be utilizing, or I should say rebuilding, a 1/16 scale radio-controlled T55 from Hooben. The model itself actually has a very interesting backstory to it. First, I must say, it comes in the most elaborate carrying case I've ever seen or ever had come to the shop. The model itself was built by the customer actually while he was serving in the military, specifically overseas, I believe Afghanistan or Iraq, either one or the other. He built the vehicle over there, painted it, and was even had it in running order, which already is pretty astounding just to get something like this built and having it operate in that type of setting with, you know, limited tools and such. But nevertheless, apparently he was able to do it. Over the years, the model unfortunately has broken down, and in more ways than one, both mechanically as well as with the detailing, and so he decided to send it over to ECA for me to give it the ECA rebuild session to it. Let me just go ahead and crack the box open so you get to see what the model looks like in its original format, as opposed to this really boss-looking aluminum carrying case. Okay, let me go ahead and take the tank out of this case. Bear with me for a moment. Alright, that's better. The tank has been the box, and now you really get a good look at it. Now, for anyone who is a fan of the channel, you'll note that this is not the first time a Hooben 1/16 scale T55 has come across my desk. I built one, it's hard to say, it's been about 8 or so years ago, and that build is of course found on the ECA channel, and it started off roughly in similar condition to the one that we see here. Now the Hooben T55s are, again, interesting in their own right. These vehicles came out, I want to say 2013 to 2014 or so, from the Chinese company Hooben. And by the way, the spelling is listed in the link below. I actually had someone try to figure out how to spell the damn name just so they could figure out where to buy these kits from. Hooben just literally just came out of nowhere onto the scene, creating 1/16 scale plastic radio control kits, but they do many other radio control kits in general. But for the topic of this video, we're just going to stick with their armor. The T55 was the first one they produced, and it was actually pretty big and exciting news at the time. What's interesting is that prior to this kit here, when you thought of 1/16 scale, you really only thought of a number of different companies, namely Tamiya, Hanlong, Toro, Tagan, as well as even Matto. On the static end, you also have brands like Trumpeter, but that's not really important for this video now, isn't it? So Hooben comes out of nowhere with this particular kit here, and I must say they did an excellent choice with not just the subject matter, but also with the execution. Subject matter is quite obvious. The T55 is, I believe, still the most mass-produced tank ever in history. Because of that, it was widely used by a multitude of different countries and is still used today, which means for you, the model builder, it is a humongous pool to pick from on the type of vehicle that you want to render. Quality of the kit, in my opinion, it seems to be similar on par with the older Tamiya kits from the 70s, like their Sherman or their King Tiger. It's just one of those things, if you ever worked on one of those older tooling kits and you see this one here, you'll definitely appreciate it. Now, some people might argue that that is a ding on the kits. My opinion, it's something that I could easily work with, and it gives you a fantastic starting base in order to add the detailing and really take it off to the next level. Now, of course, like you've seen from the beginning of the video, this vehicle here is not going to stay in this format and instead is going to be modernized and changed into the Israeli pattern of the Tiran 5 version of the T55. And also, if you want to see a more traditional layout of the T55, I recommend checking out the other video that I did of one a number of years ago, because that video, I actually built the vehicle as a base pattern T55, but that served during the Iran-Iraq War. The vehicle's materials are pretty much standard. You have plastic injection molded components for the turret, the hull, the body, the running gear. The vehicle does feature metal components such as metal suspension sets, and they do have metal track options, which I'll touch upon in a moment. The vehicles are meant to be full option RC, just like the Tamiyas, where you have the turret rotation, gun elevation, lights, sound, smoke, and, you know, just a few other odds and ends. A lot of bells and whistles to them. The road wheels are nice because they have real rubber tires on the rims, which is something that is a nice feature. Tamiya, well, they used to do that on every build, not so much these days on their recent releases, but like for instance on Tagan, these are features that you tend to pay a little bit extra for. The barrel's made from CNC aluminum. Unfortunately, regrettably for this build, this barrel's not going to be utilized, and again, I'll touch upon more of that later. The models are procured from Hooben's website, which again is listed below, but you can also find these kits available on eBay and AliExpress. The models are offered in a multitude of different ways. You can purchase it in a totally virgin unassembled kit form, where you get it just like like a Tamiya, where it's in a big cardboard box with a handle on it. You open it up, it's got all the stuff on the inside in. You can build it from there. The other option is to have them do all the hard work for you, and you can purchase the model in a ready-to-run format. There are also several options available as hop-ups, such as the addition of a smoke system, the tracks, for instance. The ones that you see on this model here are plastic, but they do have metal die-cast tracks as a replacement. In fact, I have a set over here. Come up, and it was supplied by the customer because he wants to add them to his model, which, by the way, I strongly recommend because these metal tracks are very, very nice. They have some really good detailing on them and just are a perfect addition to your T55. This kit here was actually a success for them, and they sold many new units. The kits themselves are, again, still in production as of today. The Hooben tanks all utilize their own electronic system package and are not interchangeable with the other makes that are on the market. Some would consider this a ding on the Hooben models. Because of with the way the industry is these days, the Henlong pattern has basically become the de facto ready to run 1/16 scale RC system. And this is why if you'll look at the other 1/16 scale models on the market from Tagan or Toro, they will utilize and are backwards compatible with the Henlong environment. With the Hooben here, not necessarily going to be the case, and you'll see that once I crack the model open. As for the model's condition, well, needless to say, it has seen better days. But, you know, it also does pretty much, well, replicate the condition of several real T55s that I have seen. So, take that for what you will. Alright, all joking aside, let's go ahead and get the model open so you get to see the guts of this thing. So, I'm just going to lift it. And that's what you got on the inside. It's a bit of a poof of wires. Starting with the gearbox, the model does feature a metal gearbox system. I believe these are steel, but there's only one way to find that out. And the best way to tell if they're steel or not is by taking a Dremel to it, and if it makes sparks, it's steel. No, that's a bad joke. Don't do that. The best way to tell if the gears are steel is by attaching a magnet. If it draws a magnet, guess what? You have steel gears. Fortunately, in this filming location, I do not have a magnet on hand, but I do have the next best thing, which is a motor, which does have magnets in it, as you can clearly see. So, if I take the motor, drop it on the gearbox, yep, it looks like it sticks. I'd say that's sticking to the gears, so these units do have a steel gearbox in them, which is actually probably one of the best attributes on the Hooben system. In addition to the gearbox being steel, the sprockets are also die-cast, as well as the front idlers. Again, very good quality, and I believe this also translates to the suspension swing arms as well. Basically, very similar to what you would expect to see on a Tamiya kit. Over here, on this side of the hull, is the vehicle's motherboard. It's just it's theoretically just a simple plug-and-play type system, much like you would see on the Tagens or the Elmod types, or even the Clarkboard type systems that are out there. The Hooben, though, is very simplistic. They don't even have an outer casing. It's literally just a circuit board that you stick to the inside in one way, shape, or form or another. Here we have a volume control potentiometer. This is your ribbon wire that connects to the electronics in the turret. And here we have the turret systems here. Note this tank is not equipped with the smoke system. That was like I said, an optional system. Apparently this fellow didn't opt for it. It does have the speaker though, mounted right here in the back, right underneath the speaker, or I should say the grills, common trick done on RC models. Here's the turret rotation system. Note it's very different compared to the Tagens. The plugs are also extremely different. It utilizes these Dean connectors and jacks. It's a bit of a mess. I gotta go ahead and sort all this out. And here goes the turret gun system. The elevation is controlled with a gearbox, it looks like it, from in here. The guns, this model does feature a recoiling system. I don't believe Hooben actually ever went with the airsoft system that we typically see, and these guys just have a more Tamiya type platform where that has the recoil and the muzzle flash. This is facilitated with a micro servo that we have here. And when everything works appropriately, it all plugs to this board and it should work. For some reason, however, it is not, and that is my cross to bear to figure out just what the hell is going on here, preventing it from running. For the vehicle's radio, the individual has this setup that we have here. Not too aware of this brand. Generally, I use Futaba's, or we use generally the systems that come with the tanks, like the Tagens and the Henlongs and so on and so forth. So it's going to be interesting seeing how it pairs up with this 2.4 gigahertz system. If the board is fried, I'm going to try to see if I could adapt it to fit a Tagen board, and that's going to be interesting to see how we can get all these functions to continue working on that system, but that's part of the journey now, isn't it? Aside from the functionality, as you see, the details are quite thrashed on this build. But the owner did send as many parts as he had on hand, so let me go ahead and get those parts out to see exactly what I'm dealing with here. All right, well, we got two boxes here, self-titled, Tank Parts T55. And, okay, we got here a baggie of broken plastic bits, hatches, which is good, and one less thing I have to cobble together a 3D print. Front brush guards, totally annihilated. These are going to have to be fabricated out of brass. Dushka ammo can. There's that little wooden board that goes in the front. It's a splash guard. Usually goes right here. Metal tow cable. Here's the Dushka. It is quite thrashed, so it's going to be interesting trying to put back together or possibly just straight up replacing. There you go. The stock Dushka is actually not bad. It's a good base to work from. Like I said, the quality is very similar to what you would expect to see on the older Tamiya kit. So if you ever worked on the old Tamiya 105mm Sherman and ever see the 50 caliber on that, that's very similar along the lines of what you're going to expect on the DSHK. What else? A lot of wires and plugs and LEDs and a lot of goodness here. Yep. This looks like the elevation gear system for the turret. I guess they gave you a spare one for one reason or another. And a servo with an amputated cord. Okay, spare track. That's... Alright, well, stuff to play with. This box over here, we have, oh, looks like I was wrong. He did opt for the smoke system. This looks this actually, to me, looks like the ones from the Henlonger to Tagan, so, that's good. That's actually pretty good. It makes my job a little bit easier. Well, there we have it. Yep, this is going to be fun. Well, here we have the model's hull now thoroughly stripped out. The gearbox was removed, as well as the gearbox mounting plate. The reason why I went ahead and removed everything to this point here was in order to get access to these fasteners. The previous builder went ahead and assembled the model properly. However, he didn't use any sort of thread lock on any of the bolts, and many of them were working themselves loose. So, at this opportunity here, I went ahead and decided to address that. What I basically did was I removed every single one of these fasteners, added a little drop of Loctite to each of them, and then tighten them down in place. With the Loctite added, these pieces here are never going to back themselves out as much as the model is driven, as well as it ages over time. Not only was this done to the interior mounting fasteners, but also the exterior mounting fasteners as well. Namely, the ones here where the swing arms make contact with some of their spring-assisted components. At this time, I also went ahead and took the opportunity to thoroughly wash out the interior. This model here was quite filthy. It had a bit of dust on the inside. So, at this point here, I thoroughly washed it out with some Windex and air dried everything nice and clean. And from here, I can go ahead and actually add a coat of primer to the inside just to, well, really make everything look pretty. Same can also be said about the gearbox mounting plate. It's got some overspray on it, so I'm just going to, give it another fresh coat of paint just to clean it up. On the motors and the gearboxes here, these two are actually quite filthy with tons of just fuzzy dust and other particulate on the inside, and I went ahead and thoroughly cleaned them out as well. Once everything is remounted, I'm going to go ahead and lube them up with a little bit of grease, maybe some oil on the bearings, and this should keep them nice and lubricated for the foreseeable future. Of course, after the interior is thoroughly painted with the red primer, it's then time to start remounting the interior machinery. Starting with the gearboxes, obviously the stock gearboxes are excellent in their quality, so the need to replace those was not necessary. They just got dropped directly into place into their corresponding locations. Of course, Loctite and thread lock was used on the appropriate areas. After the gearboxes were fit in place, it was then time to focus on the electronics, getting the interior fully fleshed out with its electronic and mechanical systems. And this is where I encountered a pretty severe roadblock with this project, and was one that added more to the complexity beyond just the standard complexity of converting this thing into a Tiran 5. For whatever reason, I was unable to salvage the stock electronics. The units were just completely dead as a doornail. I spent a couple weeks fiddling with them on and off, trying to get the system to activate, and no matter what I did or what I tried, the unit was just DOA. Is it because of the radio or because of something went wrong with the motherboard? Honestly, I don't know, and there was no point loitering on that topic any further. So what I had to do was completely amputate and cauterize the electronics, replacing them outright with some sort of an aftermarket solution. And this is where I predict I'm going to be receiving a little bit of flack out there for the RC system that I utilize for this model. Most individuals who work in 116 and dabble around with the electronics, they tend to use a RC package from Elmod or Clark for one reason or another. However, for this one here, I didn't use that system. Instead, I replaced it with the Tagan radio control package. The reason why I chose the Tagan package as opposed to the other two was, unlike the other two, I actually have a lot of experience with the Tagan environment, and I used the electronic packages on several other builds in the past. I know the system very well, I know how to configure it, and there's no guesswork remaining. With the other two systems, although they do have a lot of interesting features to them, unfortunately, I don't have any experience with them, and the last thing I want to be using as a guinea pig is a customer's tank. So the customer and I both agreed that the Tagan package was a good alternative for a drop-in RC solution. One engineering hurdle that I was going to have to overcome was adapting the Tagan electronics to work with many of the Hooben hardware. So this would include things like the speaker, the turret rotation, the elevation, and the smoke system. Well, fortunately, most of that was not going to be a problem because the Tagan units, or I should say the Hooben units, although the gearboxes, like I touched upon earlier, are vastly different in their design compared to the Tagan counterpart, the most important part, which are the plugs, are the same. So those were able to just drop directly into the Tagan motherboard without any sort of complications whatsoever. This was true for the main gearboxes, the turret rotation, the smoke system, and also the elevation. The speaker was also something that was able to work on the Tagan motherboard. However, at first I was going to recycle the Hooben speaker, but the speaker itself really was in poor shape after all of the years and clunking around that this model has undertaken. So partway through the construction of the model, I had to go ahead and replace the speaker because it just straight up died on me. The speaker that I used in place was the standard Tagan box speaker, and I had to go ahead and reconfigure the interior setting in order to fit on this new different type of speaker, which sounds pretty easy. However, when you have a model that's this size and the inside's getting gobbled up by all of these new accessories, trying to fit everything and make it work was a little bit of an engineering dilemma. I was able to make some cuts and modifications here or there to some of the accessories, so I was able to get them to fit inside of the closed confines of the Hooben T55 hull. Utilize the internal space, I was still able to keep all of the features that are found on the Tagan electronic sets. So for instance, the volume control is still present on this model here, and it's actually located in the same location as it was originally found on the Hooben counterpart. On this model, to adjust the volume, that is done by a potentiometer that's accessed through the bottom portion of the vehicle. You just take a screwdriver and you can dial in the sound on the sound system to how low or how loud the user wants it. Outside of the stock Tagan systems, I also went ahead and incorporated my usual 1/16 scale RC hop-ups. This would include a recharge jack as well as a smoke fluid refueling tube. On all of my 1/16 scale tanks, this is something that is, par for the course. However, for this particular build here, it is that much more important because obviously once this model is fully detailed out, the last thing you want to do is trying to take the upper and lower sections off by flipping it over and trying to undo some screws. Obviously, that's a sure bet way to cause a ton of damage if you're not super careful. So just like with all of my 1/16 scale builds, in order to recharge the tank, you simply pop open the driver's hatch and the recharge jack for the battery and the smoke fluid refueling tube are found below. The driver's hatch is also where you get access to the power switch in order to turn the tank on. One other interesting feature that I wanted to build into this model was the ability to switch between the type of lighting systems that you want to run the model with. With the way the T55 is, you actually have two options of the type of lights you want to use when running the vehicle at night. You could use just standard white light to illuminate the path ahead of you, but in case you don't want to give away your position, there's also an infrared illuminating system. And these lights are found on both the hull as well as on the turret. The Hooben model does have all of these systems that are functional. However, on this build here, I wanted to have an interesting system where you can actually switch between which one you want. This was facilitated with a three-way switch, and with the way the switch works is that if you leave the switch in the center, the lights are off. If you turn or switch over to one direction, only the white lights turn on both the hull and the turret. And if you go in the opposite direction, the infrared lights will turn on both the hull and the turret. It's a unique little gimmicky feature, but it is something that I thought was kind of cool and something I wanted to incorporate on this build. This did add a little bit to the complexity, specifically with the wiring, in order to have all of these wires going to the turret and to the hull and also to the switch itself. So that was something that I needed to take care of. However, I thought it was something that was really cool that I was able to pull off in the end. One last thing I want to mention about the hull's interior electronics involves the PC cooling fan. Of course, this is a Tagan system, and all Tagan motherboards have this function on them. It's an interesting feature, and it's one that I actually like a lot. However, one Achilles heel that it does have is that if you have a model that has a lot of internal wiring for one reason or another, be it a recharge jack, the plumbing for the smoke system, or even the equipment that dangles out of the turret, I always felt that those wires can potentially get snagged and caught up in the fan that we have here. So while I was working on this vehicle, I came up with a solution for this, which is this little part that we have right here. This here is a 3D printed Tagan CPU brush guard, and basically it's a drop-in piece. This piece has been just listed on the ECA catalog, and the way it works is, well, pretty simple. It just slides directly into those 4 holes that are found on the fan itself. You just drop this in place, and this will prevent any sort of wires from potentially getting caught up in the fan. The piece is well perforated to not inhibit the airflow at all, and it doesn't sit flush on the fan. It actually has a standoff that we can see right here on each of the legs. So when the piece is sitting on the fan, you have the airflow from the top, but also all 4 sides uninhibited for it to flow into the electronics to keep it cool doing its job. Because of the ease of installation, I'm probably going to be upgrading all of my existing Tagan builds with this exact same system, and you're going to be seeing this on all the other Tagan models that come after this point here. So, as I stated before, converting the stock Hooben T55 hull to utilize Tagan electronics is pretty straightforward because a lot of the parts are compatible with one another. However, when it comes for the components in the turret, that's not the case, and all of the Hooben electronics are not compatible, or as far as I can tell, with the stock Tagan electronics. So in order to convert the tank, the bulk of the work is going to be focused here on the turret, and this is really where a lot of important features are found because of all of the mechanical systems and functions that the vehicle needs to have. On the stock Hooben T55, the elevation and the recoil are controlled by servos. We have a large servo here with this gear on it, which would be used for the elevation. And then there's this micro servo here, and this would be for the recoil. The system has this large plastic panel, which was originally mounted on this location right over here. So these pieces were going to have to be completely redesigned in order for it to configure the Tagan system. One benefit that the Hooben T55 model does have that makes this conversion a bit easier is with the way the trunnion system is designed with the way the turret comes apart. On the Hooben system, you'll notice that the turret is a 2-half assembly, and on the bottom pan over here, we have the provisions for the elevation trunnion. This is really, really important that it's all on the bottom pan because this, again, simplifies the electronic and mechanical hookups immensely. On some vehicles out there, like the Tiger 1, for instance, either from Tagan or Henlong, some of the equipment is actually located in the top portion of the turret, which makes it a bit difficult, or I should say not difficult, but it makes it a little bit more challenging when mounting on the electronics in this type of format. Something similar can also be said with the Sherman, for instance, the 76 one specifically. Well, with the T55 here, that's thankfully not the case. So the trunnion is integrally molded onto the bottom pan, so all of the mechanical and electrical components just have to be affixed in their appropriate locations on the bottom portion. And since it's a nice solid platform, this does again aid with the simplicity of this conversion. To convert the unit, I'll start with the mods made to the trunnion area. Of course, like I stated before, the trunnion was supposed to elevate and depress the main tube with that gear type system. Well, in order to convert it for the Tagan system, some modifications were made to the mounting plate. First, that corresponding gear was removed, and several geometry changes were made to the bracket itself. The bracket is just held on with these two fasteners over here, so removing them was very, very easy. The next change was made to the recoil system itself. The original recoil was very Tamiya-esque with the way it's laid out, where we have this bracket integrally molded onto this tube section here, and a socket joint would be clipped into place over here, and this would run to the servo. Well, in order to mount on the Tagan system, I have to first figure out how the Tagan system works. So the Tagan system is this large gearbox that we have here, and this gearbox serves two functions. It does the elevation and the recoil all in one unit. This system is a off-the-shelf component from TaganTanks.com, and it supplies you not just with the gearbox setup that we have here, but it also supplies with the photostrobe flash and several bits of hardware in order to configure everything in place. I believe one thing that was missing was the small little switch that we have here, which is the kill switch for the recoil, but I'll touch upon that in a moment. Also not shown on the table is the photostrobe setup, but again, we'll touch upon that as the video progresses. So once I had the unit in hand and I figured out how all of the electrical connections work and tested them, it was then time to affix it to the turret. So this was fairly easily done. What I did was I just went ahead and fabricated this shelf, or this bracket that we have right here. This is made from a thick 1/4 inch cast resin slab. This piece is a scrap component from a 1/6 scale Sherman part set that I have, and this was just an offcast, and I just, instead of throwing them out, I have it in my spare resin bin for applications like this. The piece is nice and thick, it's pretty durable, and it allows me to do a lot of things with it if I need to cut it up for one application or another, or use it for this type of setup that we have here. The resin offers some benefits. It's nice and thick, so it's going to be pretty strong, and this is kind of important because once the piece is firmly secured in place, the gearbox can mount directly to it, and with the stress involved with the elevation and the recoil with some of the vibrations going on, you want to have something that's not going to flex or jiggle on you during operation, because if there's some play with this, it's going to cause some problems with the performance of these functions. The resin being nice and thick, it's going to absorb that very well, and it's not going to cause any problems. The resin is also very light, or I should say it's lighter compared to some other materials, and unlike metal like aluminum or steel, for instance, which will give you some nice rigidity, the resin here is more easily fitted to the bottom portion here of the pan compared to the other units, because with this one here, I could just use adhesives exclusively to secure it in place. If I'm using metal, it's going to be a little bit more harder to do this because you are going to need fasteners, as the metal over time can pop off of the bottom portion here, which can obviously lead to some serious issues. If you're going to go with fasteners, you have to make sure they're countersunk and so they're flush on the bottom, and again, it just causes it just snowballs into some more things that you have to do in order to properly build the vehicle. With the resin here, that's not the case, and it's just held on with some adhesives, and this should be a very good bond that will last for decades to come. For the gearbox, this is secured to the bridge over here with the use of both silicone as well as also a securing fastener that's right over there. The use of both of these materials keeps the unit firmly in place, and again, it's nice and solid, and it won't pop off or work itself loose as the vehicle ages. Some people are wondering why I didn't use a more permanent type of adhesive for this, for one real simple reason. If I ever, or for whatever reason, the thing fails and you need to remove it, it's easily done with the use of silicone as opposed to a permanent adhesive, because you're just going to end up breaking everything, and it's just going to lead to some more headaches if that need ever arises. But with the silicone, it does a good job with keep everything firmly in place, and it's a removable bond like I've touched upon in many, many of these videos. And also you have the insurance policy of that fastener over there to keep it firmly in place. So once the orientation was figured out exactly where does this thing secure, I then went ahead, mounted it to the turret, and went about hooking up the functions so that they mate with the Tagan system. The first was the elevation system. Like I touched on before, the bracket had to have some modifications made to the geometry in order to have it mount and function with this setup as opposed to the original. I added this notch over here so that it clears this portion here of the underside of the turret pan. And I also had to delete some of the stamped in section over here because of this mounting bracket. This bracket is made from a strip of brass and was shaped in a way where we have this slot cut on the inside. With the way the Tagan system works, you have this little cam that just spins with this gearbox, and it just goes in a certain set format. Well, with the way the Tagan models work, you have this panel over here with a cut or a slice added into it, which creates a groove. With the way the groove works, it works with a camming type motion, so whenever that little pin just goes in this circular motion, it'll just move laterally up and down the length there of the slit, which will in turn cause the unit to elevate and depress. It's a very simple system, and it's one that actually works pretty well. The Tagan set does give you several of these components for both the elevation and the recoil in nylon and I believe plastic. However, it was easier for me to refabricate these components out of metal to custom fit them to this piece, as opposed to try to adapt the Tagan ones for one reason or another. The brass is very easily sculpted, and then once it was shaped, I went ahead and drilled 2 new holes in the fairly thick, rugged steel bracket that we have over here, and used 2 fasteners with some Loctite to secure it in place. This here will never work itself loose or even shift due to the way the fasteners were fitted. As I touched upon before, the channel here had to have been ground off in this location, just so it's a nice flat area for the bracket to be fitted in place. The channel does actually 2 things. First, it adds rigidity to the plate, but the second thing is actually pretty important, is that it acts as a guide for the recoil system, and it prevents the barrel from rotating during operation. Only a small section here was flattened out for the bracket, while the remainder of the track is still present, and with the way the recoil was figured out, the portion that was ground away was not going to be utilized for the recoil, so losing that section there is not detrimental in any way, shape, or form. For the recoil, like I said before, it utilized this type of ball and socket type system, but it was in a slightly different location. It was best to move the section from this portion over here to the top section and configure it onto this large sliding plate. With the way the Tagan kit is designed, you actually have a provision for mounting on its recoil connecting system right over here. However, rather than going with that, I had to change it up slightly just because of the tight confines that we have here. It was just beneficial to go with a slightly different design compared to the Tagan original. So the ball and socket system, which originally came with the model, were recycled, but again, I moved it from this portion to this section right over here, and then I mounted to our corresponding location right here on the sliding plate. With the way the sliding plate works is that this entire unit, due to the way the gears cam, will jump backward, and then will slowly go back into the home position, mimicking the recuperators found on the real unit. Well, with the area where I drilled out, there is no contact whatsoever with the rotation gear, nor is it making any way, shape, or form contact with the camming system, which is very important with this type of setup, because if there's any inhibitants over there, it's going to cause some problems. The last tweak that needs to have been made was with the flash system. With the way the flash works is that we have this little shark fin tab here found in the sliding plate, and when it jumps back via the spring, it smashes into this little switch, connecting the current, triggering this flash, the recoil, and also the sound effect, which is present on the sound system. Well, when I hooked the system up, it was working perfectly fine, but it wasn't recoiling further back enough where this shark fin was making contact with this switch. So I needed to have added a small little extender that we have here. The extender is just made from a segment of styrene strip. It was glued in place, and once fitted, it makes up the difference so that this piece can make contact with the switch. The switch itself, I had to bend it slightly from the original just so it is more reliable with its activating process, as well as also so it's in a better location where it's to get hit with the impact system. The last thing to talk about is the kill switch that we have here, and like I said before, the model is intended to have a switch for this setup, but for one reason or another it's not supplied with the set, and this is something that can lead to some frustration when you're trying to figure things out at first, and when you first patch it in, it's not going to work because you kind of need this switch here in operation. The leads are present, but again, they are switchless. In order to configure this, I just basically picked up a switch that we have here, and this is going to be configured underneath one of the turret hatches so that the individual running the tank can kill the recoil system if need be. One thing that I did have to do to the system was extend the wires, because the wires that are supplied with the model are fairly short and stubby, and in order for it to fit inside this application here, they were replaced with these longer leads here, which gives me a little bit more room to work with the confines of the turret. And that's basically it. So from here, I'm actually going to silicone the wires in place just to make them a little bit neater, and also to prevent them from moving around and getting tangled up in the various mechanical functions, which will obviously lead to issues. So from there, I could then start working on adding the coax, as well as the remainder of the switches to the turret, not to mention getting it sealed up, where I could continue with the remainder of the build. However, before I do that, let me just go ahead and show the unit in operation, because once it's sealed up, you're not really going to be able to appreciate this. So, let me just bend the wires out of the way for the time being. The tank is powered on, so let me hit the section on the radio. See, the elevation works perfectly, and now let's try the recoil. Well, I think it's safe to say to call that a success. One last turret feature that I wanted to build into this model was the functional coax MG. Of course, this feature is built into the Tagan RC package. Utilizing it was something that was really a no-brainer. However, in order to adapt it to fit with the Hooben T55 turret did require a little bit of elbow grease. Because of the shape of the T55 turret, and also with the way Hooben designed the model, you have the free space that's found in that small little section over there thoroughly being occupied by the trunnion mechanism. Also, with the geometric shape of the T55 turret, there's really no other space in there to fit in any sort of accessory. So in order to get the MG detailing to fit and work, required a little bit of clever engineering. So what I did was I took the Tagan flash system, the MG flash system, which is an aftermarket part found on the website, on TaganTanks.com that is, and I went ahead and had to heavily adapt it and modify it to fit inside of the small confines of the trunnion. First, the Tagan piece resembles an MG34, and while the T55 utilizes an SG43 type MG, both the SG43 and the MG34 have similar features with the external detailing, namely the conical flash suppressor. And for all intents and purposes, the two will work intermittently for an application like this just fine. So the Tagan piece is longer and also has the LED light box built in. There was no way that was going to be able to fit into the confines of the turret. So what I had to do was I amputated the barrel and I removed the LED from the remaining housing that was left. The barrel section was trimmed to fit perfectly inside of the area where the T55 MG would be, and the LED was moved towards the middle section of the turret, where I fabricated its own independent light box, and then the two sections were connected via a length of fiber optic. The fiber optic was able to bend and twist into the location where the MG is without any sort of problems of it inhibiting the trunnion system, or more importantly, inhibiting the turret halves from fitting back together. Once the unit was remounted in place. Everything fit in absolutely perfectly, as if the whole unit was designed for the setup from the beginning. Just about all of the external detail components that were used to convert the T55 to an Israeli Tiran 5 are new 3D printed components found on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. Of course, I'm going to be going over more in depth about all of this information in part 2 of this video series, as I touched upon before. And with that, that wraps up part 1 of this 3-part video series on the 1/16 scale radio-controlled Israeli Tiran 5 tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being the other 2 installments for this particular video over here, or the other smaller and larger scale content that frequently gets posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on part 2.